That spice in your kitchen cabinet once cost more than its weight in gold. Empires launched bloody wars over it. 14,000 people were killed or enslaved because of it. Manhattan was traded away just to monopolize it. This is nutmeg, the most innocent spice with the darkest history you've never heard. It all traces back to a handful of volcanic islands most people couldn't find on a map. These are the Banda Islands, a tiny, isolated cluster of volcanic peaks lost in the vast Banda Sea of modern-day Indonesia. In the 17th century, this remote speck of land was the only place on Earth where the nutmeg tree Myristica fragrans could grow. The secret lay in the island's volatile geology. Active volcanoes regularly blanketed the ground in deep, nutrient-rich basaltic ash, creating fertile, well-draining soil. Combined with relentless tropical humidity and over 2,500 millimeters of annual rainfall, this created a highly specific, fragile microclimate. This legendary crop did not grow by accident. The indigenous Bandanese people were highly skilled agriculturalists. Rather than passive observers of a natural bounty, they spent generations mastering the cultivation of these temperamental trees. They developed complex, sustainable agroforestry systems, planting towering rainforest trees to shelter the delicate nutmeg crops from the harsh equatorial sun. They knew exactly when to harvest the fruit by hand, how to carefully peel away the bright red outer webbing of mace, and how to preserve the precious seeds on woven drying mats. Through their labor, a wild volcanic seed became the most valuable commodity on the planet, turning their quiet home into a target. This geographic isolation created a massive choke point. It turned a tiny volcanic archipelago into a global bottleneck. Because the nutmeg tree could not grow anywhere else, the entire world's supply of this spice had to pass through this single microscopic point in the ocean. Geography itself became the ultimate form of power. If you wanted nutmeg, you could not simply sail to a neighboring island or try to plant it in Europe. The volatile volcanic soils of Banda were a natural vault, locking the crop away behind thousands of miles of open sea and treacherous reefs. This physical restriction flipped the laws of supply and demand. Nutmeg's value came from its sheer impossibility, not its flavor. To wealthy Europeans, a single seed was a status symbol, a supposed cure for the devastating plague, and a luxury that signaled immense wealth. Global demand crashed headfirst into a fixed, tiny supply, creating astronomical prices in the markets of London and Amsterdam. This ecological bottleneck created an economic pressure cooker. The pieces were now in place. The world was desperate, the supply was locked in a single volcanic archipelago, and it would only take one ruthless, power-hungry corporation to realize that controlling these islands meant controlling global wealth. In 1602, the Dutch Republic chartered the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, known simply as the VOC. This was not a normal merchant company. The VOC was a corporate state hybrid, a joint stock entity engineered to project raw national power for private profit. Under its 1602 sovereign charter, the company possessed powers typically reserved only for sovereign nations. It could mint its own currency, build massive stone forts, negotiate international treaties, and deploy a private army of 10,000 mercenary soldiers. It was a corporation with its own navy. In 1619, a man named Pieterszoon Coen became the VOC Governor General. Coen was a ruthless accountant who saw human lives as mere ledger entries. He operated under a worldview of absolute commercial and religious certainty, summarized by his personal motto, "Do not despair, spare not your enemies, for God is with us." To Coen, mass violence was not a moral failing or a deviation from trade. It was a cold, calculated business method. In his letters to the company directors, he argued that commerce could not be maintained without war, and war could not be funded without commerce. The dark truth about this spice is that its path to your kitchen was cleared by a corporation that treated slaughter as an investment. This should make you angry. In May 1621, Pieterszoon Coen and his private VOC army launched a systematic campaign of violence on the Banda Islands. The objective was absolute, eliminate any resistance to the Dutch nutmeg monopoly. Coen began by targeting the leadership. The VOC seized 44 orang kaya, the respected Bandanese headmen. Under the watch of Japanese mercenaries hired by the company, these leaders were systematically tortured, beheaded, and quartered, their body parts displayed on bamboo poles. But the slaughter did not stop with the leaders. Dutch soldiers marched through the islands, burning entire villages to the ground. The VOC hunted the fleeing survivors into the volcanic hills, blockading the shores to prevent food from arriving, letting starvation and exposure do the work of the sword. Desperate families threw themselves off rocky cliffs rather than submit to corporate capture. Out of an estimated 15,000 Bandanese people living on the islands before the invasion, roughly 14,000 were killed, starved, or dragged onto ships into slavery. An entire civilization was systematically erased from the earth in a matter of months, all to secure a corporate monopoly over a baking ingredient. This should make you angry. With the native population almost entirely wiped out, the VOC faced a self-inflicted labor shortage. The trees were still there, but the skilled farmers who understood them were gone. To solve this, Coen instituted the Perkinier system, carving up the islands into corporate parcels and importing Javanese and Ambonese slaves to work the land under the whip of Dutch overseers. The blood of the Bandanese was washed away, replaced by a state-backed slave plantation system. A corporate giant had successfully transformed a diverse, independent homeland into a forced labor camp designed solely to feed the commodity markets of Europe. In July 1667, the Second Anglo-Dutch War ended not with a dramatic battle, but with the stroke of a pen. The Treaty of Breda reshaped the map of the modern world. In a shocking geopolitical swap, the Dutch surrendered their claim to a small, muddy fur-trading outpost in North America called New Amsterdam, today known as Manhattan, in exchange for a tiny, isolated island in the Banda archipelago called Run. To the merchants in Amsterdam, this was a massive victory. Manhattan was a distant wilderness, and Run was the final piece of the global nutmeg monopoly, producing thousands of kilograms of the world's most valuable crop every year. The Dutch believed they had swindled the English, trading a useless American island for a golden ticket of spice. What does it say that the Dutch traded Manhattan for a speck of spice? What do we still trade for profit today? If you want to uncover more dark histories of the everyday items in your home, hit the subscribe button right now. In 1769, a French horticulturist named Pierre Poivre smuggled dozens of nutmeg seedlings out of the Dutch East Indies, transplanting them to Mauritius. Within decades, British and French plantations sprouted in Grenada and St. Vincent, flooding the market. By the early 19th century, the Dutch monopoly shattered and prices collapsed from fortunes to pennies. The royal luxury became a common baking ingredient buried in your kitchen cabinet. Yet on the Banda Islands, the story never faded. Today, crumbling stone walls of Dutch forts still look over the volcanic soil, and the descendants of those who fled keep the memory alive in songs. This forces us to ask, who writes history when a company has armies? And when a commodity becomes a reason to kill, who pays for restitution? Open your kitchen cabinet. That jar of nutmeg isn't just a holiday spice, it's a quiet monument to corporate cruelty and forgotten blood. We live among the comfortable relics of brutal empires, utterly blind to the violence on our shelves. Subscribe for more dark histories.